Well, as I discussed yesterday, the S word is kind of on fire this week. Ever since Rush Limbaugh sort of kicked this off by letting the word slip. Not saying that he himself endorses it, but that, based on what he's seeing and what he's hearing from people, he thinks that this country is moving towards secession as a general principle. And that's something that I agree with. That's something that I've been talking about for a long time. Ever since, but I don't think that Limbaugh all of a sudden is just the first person to think of this. I mean, obviously I thought of that, but I don't think that it was just me before either. I think a lot of people have been thinking this way, but, so conditioned from our education system telling us that the idea of separating from the United States is synonymous with slavery, and all that nonsense. It's like, oh, you can't talk about secession or else you don't want to be called a racist, do you? Racism is bad. I think that's sort of lost its impact over the years as the word racist has been so diluted, and you call people racists anyway, that they're kind of losing that fear. And also generally with the demonization of American historical figures, including Abraham Lincoln, who was not a great guy to begin with. Lots of people in American history are not great guys, but when you start tearing down statues and things, then the knives come out. You can't just sit up there and pontificate about how evil Robert E. Lee is and then not talk about the evil things that Abraham Lincoln did or some of these other people. And of course, the left agrees, if you do that. So with the general so part of the thing that was keeping the lid on this idea of secession is that, oh no, we're all Americans, and it's totally taboo to question these things. Separating from the Union, oh my gosh, it's so unpatriotic. Well, that barrier is kind of gone when you have so many people who are outwardly unpatriotic or even anti-American. I have to thank the left for breaking that taboo. When you see so many people in this country who clearly hate the U.S. and its history, it becomes impossible for them to lecture the right wing in this country on being unpatriotic. People just aren't going to tolerate that. I think that, now that more and more ordinary Americans, even boomer cons, are waking up to the fact that, the people who are against them politically do not have mere disagreements with them, but they hate their country and they hate their way of life. That even those ordinary Republican voters, your boomer con types, are saying, why the hell would I want to be a part of a country with these people? And it's not just people who grew up in former Confederate states like I did. This is something that that people are talking about, I think, all around the country. This idea that our politics are irreconcilable. And this is not a bad thing at all. This is a very positive development. What's much scarier is people talking about the idea of civil war. And, that's probably the most, the worst thing right now, is that the idea of secession is lumped together and associated with the idea of civil war. A civil war, which, by the way, the American Civil War was not a civil war. It was a failed war of independence. European scholars and, well, even honest American history scholars recognize that difference. A civil war is when you have multiple factions within a country fighting for control over the capital and the government of the entire country. It's not when you have part of the country trying to break off and become an independent nation. But anyway, I mean that's a little bit off besides the point. The point is that secession is actually how you prevent a civil war. If you can draw a line and say, hey, we recognize that we're different from you. And rather than killing each other over deciding who's going to control the central government, we're just going to break that central government up and say, you know what, we need to go our separate ways. Things are getting too heated. That's a peaceful way of resolving political disputes. And in fact, I think that it's an option that should be utilized as much as possible. I think that secession is more useful than an election, frankly. I think that political units should continuously be broken up into as small units as possible, so that those those units, those political entities are as unified as possible and consist of people who, share the same values and don't want to fight each other over politics. Because we are rapidly approaching the point to which a majority of Americans realize that there is no political solution to our problems. There's no electoral solution. I think that, as I've said, this election is red-pilling a lot of people. A lot of people, at the end of this, no matter who comes out on top, I think half the country is going to throw their hands up in the air and say, we tried, we fought, we did everything we could, but at the end of the day, it wasn't enough, and we don't want to live under the rule of the other side. Again, I thought that the left, based on the results of the Transition Integrity Project, was the most likely to take up the mantle of secession, and that's why I preferred, way back in, I guess, October, I finally decided, maybe it'd be better off if Trump won. But now it looks like that even though Trump is probably not going to pull this off in the end, the right might take up that mantle as well. Not immediately. I don't think that this is going to be a situation to where all of a sudden, let's say the Supreme Court throws out this case, and then the state of Texas the next day, declares independence from the Union. It's not going to be that fast. It's going to be a slow process. But what it'll serve to do is wake a lot of people up. It'll make people realize that even when we go to the courts and we try to adjudicate these problems that a lot of people have raised, very concerning issues that a good chunk of the country thinks are very legitimate problems, if you can't even get a hearing with that, then and the courts are they're your last peaceful recourse. That's your last step if you're trying to work within the system. The Supreme Court is your last resort. If that gets you nowhere, people are going to be hopeless. And so when people hit rock bottom, they can essentially choose one of two paths, and that is to one, engage in violent revolution and try to overthrow their political rivals who had bested them up to that point. A solution that I do not favor. The solution where you see a lot of, you see the memes online of people saying, how many millions and millions of guns does the right own, and how many does the left own? Stuff like that, I chuckle at it, but I don't like to see it. I don't ever want to see something like that come to fruition. Because let's say you did that, let's say you won, what are you going to do with the other half of the country once you've vanquished them militarily? They're not going away. So the peaceful solution to America's political problems is for people to go their separate ways. America's national divorce at this point is a matter of necessity. It is the only way that I see the current situation in the United States not escalating into further violence. We've seen violence this year. We've seen riots in the streets. We've seen a couple of instances of, like I think that people cite the Portland Antifa guy. That was a politically motivated murder, plain and simple. But at this point, it's not widespread. But it will become more and more widespread as time goes on, if nothing is done to de-escalate this situation. Now, you say, well, then why do you have to destroy America? Why can't we all be Americans? Well, the reason why we can't all be Americans, it's not that America's becoming more and more different Americans are becoming more and more different from each other. I don't think that that's really the big issue. The big issue is that the United States, institutionally, is becoming more and more centralized. And there is no real will or means to reform the U.S. system and to make it more like what the founders had in mind, to where you had most political decisions made at the local and the state level, and very few things being decided at the federal level. We increasingly have a nationalized government, and that's not healthy, because that means that 49% of the country is going to be oppressed by 51% of the country. And so vast regions of the United States feel completely alienated by whoever is leading the country at any given time. And so in lieu of an official program of decentralization where the federal government gives up powers back to the states, who are, at this point 40 states who are in conflict with each other over this lawsuit, which really this lawsuit is a proxy for the broader culture war. As long as the federal government is not going to give in and surrender the powers that it has assumed, powers which have been growing since 1791, when the Constitution first came into effect, or was it 1789? Yeah, it was 1789, I believe. These states, in order to de-escalate the political tension, I think will have to engage in a program of decentralization through unilateral action. And that is first through nullification, which we've already seen. Again, this was started by the left-wing states because the left-wing states are not worried of the label of neo-Confederate. They are not worried because the Confederacy is associated with the right wing, not with the left wing, and so they don't care if you call them that. They will have their sanctuary cities. You see some copycats on the right saying, okay, we're going to have our sanctuary counties for the Second Amendment in Virginia and other places. And so we're going to see more of that over the next 4 years. I see the big wedge issue really being guns. I don't know what else could be a more divisive issue. Joe Biden is currently running on, or not running, after he was quote-unquote elected, according to the Associated Press. Joe Biden is now saying that he wants to add, he wants to essentially take the language of the old Clinton-era assault weapons ban and take those guns and put them on the NFA list and make them NFA items, which means that they would be registered with the federal government, very stringent regulations. If it gets lost, you're legally responsible, blah, blah, blah. You have to pay a $200 tax stamp. Essentially, you would be treating AR-15s like they're machine guns in a legal sense. And this would also mean the forced registration of most guns in America. And everyone would have to pay a $200 tax stamp for every one of those guns. It's something that is completely unenforceable. And of course, it would be the prelude to an eventual gun confiscation program, because once the government knows where all the guns are and they're all registered, they can just come knock on your door and say, nope, we're changing the law. You can't own these anymore. We're going to confiscate them. And so if this sort of law were to be passed by a Democratic Congress and signed into law by Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, there would be many of these 20 red states who are either a party to or in favor of this lawsuit. They would probably nullify that law, say we're not going to enforce it. And if the federal government tries to enforce it themselves, then you could see a situation where a state or two might decide to secede. I think I've said in the past that secession, it's going to start on one direction, from whether it's the left or the right. If it starts on the left, it was going to be California that went first. If it starts on the right, most likely Texas will go first. And then from there, the dominoes will begin to fall, because once there's a big state that has a lot of electoral votes on one side of the aisle leaves the union, then that side will know that they will be politically vanquished in any upcoming federal elections. The right has no chance of winning in this country without Texas, and the left has no chance of winning in this country without California. So once one of those two states leaves, everyone else on their side is going to head for the exits. And they're likely going to do so, citing similar reasons. And that's when things get interesting. A lot of people say, oh my gosh, that would lead to a second civil war. That's terrible. No. Americans do not have the stomach for that. The only reason why there was a first civil war is because Abraham Lincoln decided to try and keep the southern states in the Union. There was no reason for him to do that. But, those were very different times. You could get away with stuff like that. You could not get away with trying to keep half the country, trying to keep the Union together in 2020 or 2021 or 2022. It wouldn't happen. People don't want to see their sons dying on TV. They don't want to see their cities being blown up. I mean, the outcry from the from the international community, from the likes of China, from the European Union. I simply believe that a U.S. civil war over something like secession is politically unfeasible. And that's why I say that secession is what would avoid a civil war. The way you start a civil war is if you start trying to, say, enforce gun confiscation or these very onerous gun laws, because then you're going to have gun owners fighting back. You're going to have 10,000 Waco sieges essentially. And that is going to spark a bottom-up rebellion. And I think that's something that everyone should avoid, if possible. I certainly don't want to participate in something like that. I don't have a death wish. And of course, I don't want to kill people either. Now, I guess one last note on the lawsuit, how I think the lawsuit plays into all this. I kind of got into that yesterday, but I'll review a bit here. I think that the lawsuit here is going to make one side feel disenfranchised. Either, as the mainstream media predicts, this case will be dismissed outright. The Supreme Court will not take it up. They will just say, nope, we're not going to take your case. Good day, sir. And the right will feel completely disenfranchised. The court system will have completely shut them out. They would have been stonewalled at every point. And I think that a lot of people on the right will, at that point, feel like they're done with this system. There's nothing more that they can do to work within the system. And so, therefore, things like this resolution in the Texas House to hold an independence referendum in the state of Texas, things like that will gain a little more popularity. And of course, people have brought up Texas independence for my entire lifetime, and there's always some interest, but not a ton. But, a real disappointment from the Supreme Court could jumpstart something like that. Now, if the Supreme Court does take this case up, and they do rule in Texas's favor, as I said yesterday, I think that will completely make the left's head explode. And at that point, I think that you're going to see some more open rebellion from blue states. It's hard to see how the Union makes it through the next 4 years of a potential second Trump term under these circumstances, in one piece. Now, the one scenario I do see, which could bring down the temperature in this country a bit, it'll kick the can down the road, but it will not immediately lead to the pot boiling over, is if the Supreme Court takes up this case, they hear it, and then they simply rule against Texas and say, yeah, you said some stuff, but Joe Biden's president anyway. That, as I said, because there is still some residual trust in the Supreme Court. Some people will take the Supreme Court at their word. Others will be very bitter over it. But, the left as a whole and some on the right will be satisfied by that. And so, therefore, you can get through this without creating a total disaster. So those are my thoughts as things stand now. As this process starts working, I will give my updated thoughts on how things are turning out. So please do stay tuned for that. If you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.